Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Barnes, Professor of Business Management here at Lakeland Community College, and I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight and thank you for coming to the Dworkin and Bernstein Management Lecture Series at Lakeland Community College. This series is brought to you through the endowment of the Dworkin and Bernstein Law Firm. This is our Spring 2019 series, and tonight we're going to be hearing from David Ebersole, and in April we're going to hear from Eileen Bewley, the president of BevCorp in Willoughby. Again, our speaker tonight is David Ebersole, Director of Economic Development for the City of Cleveland. David Ebersole was appointed to the position of Director of Economic Development in May 2018 by Mayor Frank Jackson of the City of Cleveland. He has worked for the City of Cleveland for over 10 years in the Department of Economic Development, starting in 2008. He started out working on the redevelopment of brownfield sites. Those are areas of the city area that are either vacant, abandoned, or environmentally contaminated. And his job was to bring those back into productive use. In 2015, he was appointed by Mayor Jackson to serve as assistant director, and then again in 2017 to serve as interim director of the department. His work was recognized by the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency when he was awarded the 2014 award for outstanding leadership in brownfield redevelopment. He is also a 2016 member of Crain's Cleveland Business 40 Under 40. Dave grew up in Strongsville, Ohio, and is a graduate in economics from Carnegie Mellon University, and he went to the Case Western Reserve University School of Law. He's a member of the Ohio Bar. Dave currently lives in the West Park neighborhood of the City of Cleveland with his wife Rachel and his daughter Valerie. Please help me to welcome David Ebersole, Director of Economic Development for the City of Cleveland. See if I can do this.
All right, well, good evening. Okay, good. I learned that from the mayor. When the mayor starts a speech, he says good evening, and if they don't respond in enough of a voice-surface response, he'll say it again. So, good evening. Good evening. All right, great. Thanks for having me today. Without trying to go like all old man on people or something, but I left my notes on my desk at work. So fortunately, I have a cell phone, so I have a little bit of an agenda here to talk about. But I really appreciate you having me out today. I hope that I can provide some insight or teach a little bit of a moment and tell a little bit about my story that you can find it's helpful to you in your life. So my name's David Ebersole. I'm the Economic Development Director for the City of Cleveland. I started working in 2008 when I graduated from law school. It took me about 5 months to get hired at the city and through the process. If you recall, in 2008 we had a little bit of a recession, and there was a hiring freeze that was the city imposed to keep the budget balanced in 2008 and 2009. So I was the very last hire that got approved before the hiring freeze. So I had a little bit of lucky, but it worked out for me really pretty well. So I grew up in Strongsville. I grew up around here. I've always wanted to work in the city, work in development, work in government. So the path worked out for me pretty well, but I never really knew how I was going to pull all of this together until in 2008, in the spring, I was taking my last set of courses as part of getting my law degree, and I took a course on community development in the law. And so the class was taught by the president of the Third Federal Foundation, Third Federal Savings, and he brought in different people from the community. So instead of getting a lecture or reading out of a textbook every week, which if you go to law school, all you do pretty much is read out of books and highlight things over and over and over and over again, and then recite them in obscure scenarios that professors like to pick up when they're, I don't know what they're doing, probably at 4 o'clock in the morning or something, because there's some pretty weird things that happen, but there's some pretty weird things that happen in life anyway. So so he brought this in, and he brought in the director of economic development for the city, and my predecessor, she had just started out as director. She'd been appointed by the mayor in the spring of 2008, and so Tracy Nichols gave her presentation, and she concluded with it and said, well, and if anybody's interested, we just posted a couple of positions we're looking to hire. And I said, well, I would really like to have a job, so I'm going to put my resume in and apply. And so I did, and we had an interview, and I got, we graduated in May. I think I got my notice that I'd been hired in May or June of 2008, which was, a great relief. I didn't have to go out and search for a job, and then we were going to I was going to start in August, so you took the bar in July, and then I was going to start right after that. Well, that didn't happen, and we sat and I waited, and I got nervous, and I had to go out and try and look a little bit more, and in the summer of 2008, nobody was really hiring, and if you think you had a job and now you're starting over again, you were really in trouble. So I had a nervous couple months, but I got started in October, and I really feel blessed that it worked out for me, because I really enjoy doing what I was doing. So I get started working for the city, and I'm working in brownfield redevelopment. Brownfield redevelopment is the redevelopment of vacant and abandoned sites. So a city like Cleveland, big industrial legacy, a lot of history, a lot of built factories that were closed down, shut down, and walked away. Company went out of business, or property was just abandoned, and no one was left responsible for the site, so they sit there. So first week on the job, maybe I said, well, why don't we go out and we'll do a site visit? You should probably see what one of these sites looks like. So I go out to a building, and I'm standing there. We get out of the car, and there's a bunch of guys walking around wearing the hazmat suits, so, the full suit with gas mask, visor, all this kind of stuff. And I'm sitting here and thinking, okay. And I'm like, the guy I'm with walks over, and he says, hey, we're from the city. This is what we're going to do. Can we go in and take a look around? Okay. Well, we go in and we look around, and we're dressed like this. We're not wearing anything, and I'm walking in, and there's guys walking around here, and this was a plating company, and the process of plating is kind of a way in which material, like a car panel, can get hardened, essentially, makes it more resistant. And basically the way that works is you dip the product into a vat of some type of chemical, which is usually not good for smelling, touching, getting anywhere close, dumping on the ground, which is what they used to do most of the time when they got rid of these materials. So there's guys in hazmat suits just kind of like shoveling this stuff out, bucketing it out as part of the project. And it's dark in most of the area. There's just dangling lights, and so I walk around a little bit, and it's like walking in the set of a horror movie. There's lots of different, the rooms are cut off. It's these old industrial buildings too. They're built like fortresses. They're brick, and they have hard walls separated. If you've been in a manufacturing facility that's been built in the last 20, 30 years, it's a big steel frame building that's open. You can see from one side to the other. Not the way they were built 100 years ago. So I'm walking around in this place, and I look at the walls, and there's this line about, it's kind of like you see there's a light here and there's a dark here, and so there's a line, and the brick is all white on the bottom side of the line. I'm like, well, that's really interesting. So I walk over, I look at it, and the guy said, well, let's stay back over here. I'm like, well, you're in a hazmat suit. I'm going to stay back over here. And walked through it, and then eventually I asked, so what was going on over there? He said, well, the thing is, when they built this building, like most buildings that age, it was laden with asbestos. And I guess when they decommissioned the building, or at some point later on, they spilled some of the chemical into the walls and the asbestos started coming out of the walls. And I'm like, I am going to die. I've been working for a week and this is the end. This is the end. This is something that's going to happen to me every day. We're going to go out. Well, fortunately, we were a group of two, myself and the guy who I was working under, and he was a nice guy, a little bit odd. He liked going out into these buildings. About 9 months after I started, he said, okay, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to go get my PhD at Georgia Tech. I leave in 2 weeks. Here's all these projects I've been working on. You're going to have to take over managing them. And I said, okay, great. And I said, well, at least that way I don't have to get dragged into these asbestos buildings anymore. I can work from the office. I can look at the pictures. I'm fine. So 9 months on the job. I know just enough to get by. And all of a sudden, I pick up all of the work that I was doing, plus all of his work. And if you recall, we were still in the middle of a hiring freeze. So now all of a sudden, I've got a whole new set of projects, some of the most complicated capital stacks projects that have been the city's working on. And I got to figure out how to make all this work. And it worked out okay. But I think that, the story there is that it was a big challenge, but it was a big opportunity, right? And so I worked for 3 years roughly where I was the only person in the city who was doing brownfield projects. So I learned a lot about how to do brownfield projects. I got to work a lot with the director. I got some exposure, and so it was it seemed like a burden at the time, but it was a big help to my career and a great opportunity that kind of put me on the path to how I wound up being the director today. So maybe someday you too will be in a asbestos palace, and when you think that you're about to die, just remember that there's a lot of lawyers out there that are making a lot of money suing asbestos companies, so you probably are going to be okay. But it's also an opportunity. So that's really, I think, how I got to where I am today. That's the beginning of my story. So what is economic development? So I've been serving as director or assistant director of economic development for the city for a little bit, 3.5, 4 years, I guess. And so it's the question that I get a lot. What is economic development? Well, economic development is helping to get businesses and development started, going, and thriving within the city of Cleveland. The way that the city of Cleveland is organized is we kind of have 3 departments that work in development. We have city planning, we have community development, we have economic development. City planning does broad plans, neighborhood plans, zoning, landmarking, historic districts, a whole bunch of transportation stuff about how land use in the city of Cleveland is regulated and deployed. Economic development, we work with business. We work with real estate, commercial and industrial real estate. Community development works with housing, works with some of the social services side of things. But those items are all in a lot of ways linked. And so, what I do is tied to what is going on in housing, is tied to what's going on in planning. And so it's all feedback that kind of goes, you wind up working through the process. One of the big things we're working on now that I think kind of talks about how those items are linked is the Mayor Jackson's Neighborhood Transformation Initiative. And so the Neighborhood Transformation Initiative is designed to help to stimulate development and growth in areas of the city that are not seeing a whole lot of market activity. The areas that were selected to work in, we went through a large process, went through a study to help identify the areas that we were going to work in. And the concept was really what areas of the city, if you were drawing if you were just looking on a map and knew nothing else, would you see where there's a whole lot of activity going on and then very quickly things fall off? And there's a lot of reasons why that happened historically, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But by and large, there are areas in the city that are doing very well, that are directly adjacent to areas that have significant challenges of poverty, of degraded building stock, and a lack of business and investment. So the mayor's challenge to us collectively was to think about how we could come up with new programs that could come in and stimulate investment, drive investment into these areas of the city in a way that is market-driven and short-term. So if we go in, we invest, we build a couple buildings, we go off, we build somewhere else, and nothing has changed except there's a couple of new buildings, then we haven't really accomplished our goal. We haven't done what we wanted to do. So the real goal then is to go in, hit hard, pull back out, and have market activity follow in behind us. And if you wanted to boil down economic development into one sort of idea concept, I think that's it. It's filling those gaps that the private sector market won't fill, with the goal of helping to stimulate and bring about private market activity. That's what we're trying to do. So with the neighborhood initiative, what we're really trying to do comprehensively is think about how housing, how commercial development, and how area-wide planning as a whole can work together to find ways to make neighborhoods grow. So, for example, you have main commercial corridors in the city of Cleveland. In one of the areas we're working on, Glenville, it's just north of University Circle. It's East 105th Street is the main corridor. Main commercial corridors are designed to be areas of commerce where you have retail, where you have offices, where you may have those apartments higher up. So the kind of mixed-use development that you see in some of the hotter areas of the city, or that you might think of if you go to, I think Washington, D.C. is a great example of it, but you see low-rise buildings with residential or office use, you have retail on the street. And so that's what commercial corridors are for, right? It's for where you go to get your services. You go to, go to the bakery, you go to the pharmacist, you go to get dry cleaning done, and all of those services are there. And so one of the big challenges on our commercial corridors in some of these areas of disinvestment in the city are there's not this lack of services there. Why aren't there services there? Well, because the neighborhood that is in behind doesn't have a lot of housing that's there. There's a lot of vacancy, vacant homes, vacant lots. It's one of the challenges. And so when retail businesses are making decisions, the first test that they look to almost always is rooftops. How many rooftops are there in the area when you look at the map? Second test, income. How much money do people make in the area? So if you have a poor neighborhood with a lot of vacancy, you have struggle to attract retail. If you have a main commercial corridor that's got a lot of vacancy, that doesn't have a lot of services, so that people would come who live there would be able to get access to the things that they need day to day, why would people come to live there? So a failing commercial corridor and a failing residential neighborhood reinforce one another. A successful residential neighborhood and a successful commercial corridor reinforce one another too. And so what we're trying to do through the Neighborhood Transformation Initiative is to try and work comprehensively to attract retail into our corridors, to help rebuild our housing stock, and make it so that these areas, these neighborhoods can grow and thrive and build up once again. So in thinking about what I do, economic development on a day-to-day basis, that's pretty much what I do. So what are the values that I think that we we try to bring to the table, and that I think really informs what I'm trying to do at work and what I try to do in living my job. I think the first value, probably the most important value, is equity. It's how do we make decisions in an intentional way that helps to lead to equitable outcomes for all of our residents. So when you're working in the public sector, your bottom line isn't profit, it's service. How do you serve the people that, if you're elected, serve the people that elected you? If you're like me and you're an appointed official or a member, even a civil servant within the administration, how do you serve the residents who are ultimately your boss? And I think when we think about how we can best do that bottom line, we have to think about how we do that in an equitable way. So how do we think about decisions that were made historically and how we can rectify them? How do we think, in my job, how do we think about where has the market failed and how can we help to stimulate growth and stimulate development? So one example of kind of what we do programmatically, SBA loans are a huge asset for businesses. But one of the challenges that businesses face when they're looking at getting an SBA loan is that an SBA loan requires that the borrower fund 25% of the project through their own pocket. So great, you're a long-term business, you've got a lot of value in the asset, you've got cash on hand, great, you can pull that 25% together pretty easily. Or you're a startup business, in the tech field, healthcare. Those are the kinds of startups that we see a lot of. Maybe you're a doctor at the Cleveland Clinic, a professor at Case, or you're associated with that. Well, great. There's probably funds that you have access to. There may be you may have a fairly high income, so you've got quite a bit of savings or whatever that you can invest into your product. You may have access to friends or family who look at something and say, boy, this is a great idea, I'd like to be part of it, how can I make it happen? Now let's look at it from the other side. So we just did a launch for our neighborhood incubator, and one of the operators that we worked with was a woman who wanted to start her own clothing line. So you have someone like that who is a minority, female, grew up in a impoverished neighborhood, probably doesn't have a lot of friends or family with deep pockets that they can go to ask for a little bit of investment to help get their project started. Maybe has had a bad experience at some point in their life and has challenges with a record of bankruptcy, or has gotten behind on their loans, whether it's student loans or a car loan or their home loan. In Cleveland, there was a ton of housing foreclosure. People who have, maybe somebody has a foreclosure in their background. Those individuals really struggle to get that 25% equity. So we came up with a program that we designed to help provide grant funding to help absorb a piece of that equity requirement that people have to come up with to get access to that SBA loan. And so then we, the public sector, take on that risk. A person can get access to that loan that then helps them grow their business and go on and live and work for themselves. Another example, the lack of wealth is a real challenge in the communities that we do a lot of work in. And so the biggest asset, most people, regardless of background, most Americans, their wealth is stored in their home. And so if in Cleveland we had a lot of foreclosure issues in 2008, we had market values that went way down. And so a lot of people, if they were lucky enough to have had built up some value in their home, lost all of that value. And so when people are looking for money, in a lot of cases, or need money for something, they can borrow against their home. And so that value has gone away. If you have, how does that work? Well, think you could have somebody who has the family who wants to send their kid to college. Maybe they've worked all their life, made their payments, have a kid, they want to do better than they did, want to get them off to college, could borrow against the home, but you just lost 50% of the value of the home, and you can't. So how do we fix that? Well, working through the neighborhood initiative, we've come together with some programs to try and invest in building up the housing values. And in some of these edge neighborhoods that we're working in, that we've talked about, we've seen that value come up. So what's the challenge then that's created? Well, the challenge when those values go back up is that property taxes go back up, insurance goes back up. And so in these communities which have these, you may have one person I was talking about is trying to build up their wealth. You may have the person next door might be a senior citizen on a very restricted income for whom that value going back up really pinches the paycheck, what they can do day in and day out. And even though, great, they have more value in their home too, but for them, their home is their home. It's not a wealth asset, it's where they live, and now it costs twice as much to live there. So in thinking about this from an equity lens and an equity perspective, you can't launch a program or a series of items in a neighborhood to stimulate investment and to increase wealth values without also trying to work programmatically on the other side to make sure that the people who are impacted from that negatively are also getting some benefit. And so there's a homestead exemption for senior citizens that can get them reduction in their property taxes. There's programs out there that can help people to build up rebuild their home so that it's more livable. And so working on one side, you also have to work on the other side, and that's how we can work and live that equitable life. Third point, the other easy pathway to wealth is through owning a business. And so one of the programs that we're doing and that we're trying to do is a suite of programs around trying to stimulate business growth, again, in these more distressed, impoverished communities. I think the big concept, and it's a couple years ago, but it's still resonating, is the idea of a side hustle, where there's a lot of people that do things on the side to take advantage of a skill set they have, or something that they can do to raise a little bit of money on their own back to supplement whatever it is that they're doing day to day. So whether it's whether it's the gig economy and driving an Uber one night a week, or start baking cookies and selling them at the local farmers market. It's a growing thing, and it's an especially important thing in a lot of these smaller communities. Many of our communities of color, many of our communities with poverty have a lot of latent entrepreneurship that is not accessed through traditional market means. You don't see it if you don't go looking for it. And so from our side, from the development side, from the public sector side, what we are trying to do is finding ways that we can eliminate some of those impediments and create opportunities for individuals to gain access to that startup capital, gain access to the resources that are needed to turn some of those hustles into something that maybe is a little bit more. And maybe if you can work it through that phase, and maybe if there's a little bit more than that, maybe there's a real market out there that you can scale something up for production and go on and own business and thus create and build some wealth in yourself. You can't tell what is going to go from a startup concept or a startup idea to being something that's really big. I can't. I mean, some of you are probably smarter than me, and you'll figure it out, but I can't. But I think where we fail is when we don't give people opportunities to do so. And so as we're thinking this through, as we're thinking about how we can help create opportunities for growth, create entrepreneurial advancement, we're really trying to focus on growing that funnel. Not everybody who wants to own or operate their own business necessarily wants to grow it to be a 100-employee firm that distributes throughout the state. A lot of people would be happy, I think, having a bakery or a jewelry shop or something along those lines that pays the bills, that you go to work every day, that you create and do what you want. Maybe you have 4 or 5 people, but you're your own boss. And that's great. And that's, I think, a lot of times, and certainly the view of the capital markets that is required to stimulate that kind of stuff is that that's not an attractive investment. There's no growth potential there. There's no long-term significant returns in that type of investment. And so people basically, if you want to do that, you have to figure out a way to build it yourself, take on all the risk on yourself. And so to the extent that we can help write down that risk, I think that's really valuable in giving people that opportunity to take the step up and live and do what they want to do. And again, it sort of ties back to that concept of equity. There's a lot of people out there, I think I'm one of them who've been fortunate enough to come from a good home, that have been fortunate enough to have that safety net to be able to go off to school and go off to law school and throw an obscene amount of money to a university and been able to do so to get their life started. But there's a lot of people that aren't. And so to think about how we in the public sector can make that opportunity, lift people up, give them that opportunity, I think is the way in which we have to think in order to be successful as an economic development entity, to be successful as a city. So the equity perspective is really important. And I think equity ties really well with opportunity. Equity and opportunity are in a lot of ways linked, and I talked a lot about it before, so I'm not going to go too far down the road, but poverty, historic redlining, has denied people for opportunity for longer than I think any of us have been alive. And so it's a real tragedy, I think, when people who have potential are denied opportunities. And so as I try to think about my work day to day, there's one of the inspiring things, I think, is how many people are out there who are looking for that opportunity. I think we did 100 projects in the city of Cleveland last year. We've done 100 projects a year where we funded in various levels from a few $1,000s to a few $1 million. And we've done about 100 projects every year that I've been at the city, for every year for the last 10 years. And in thinking about that, all of those are driven by people who are taking a chance and trying to create an opportunity. Whether it's building an enormous skyscraper or a large entertainment district, or investing in a small business that's opening up a corner shop. It's really an investment in opportunity. I think one of the great benefits that we get from being on the public sector side is that we can take on a little bit of risk. If you go and you talk to a banker and they talk about the different types of lending, big developments, whether it's a large housing concept or a big tower, they're underwritten based on the numbers. The bank looks at it, they look at the return, they have a formula. They look at the value of the collateral, they have a formula. They look at what the repayment history is, they have a formula. And it all kind of boils down to a series of numbers, and they take it to underwriting committee, and the underwriting committee says yes or no. That's kind of how the process works. When you're in banking and you're in small business lending or relationship lending, you're lending based on people. And banks still have boxes they have to fit in, which is why there's been a lot of challenges in small business lending. Even, we're in the midst of a 10-year expansion, economic expansion, but small business lending is still real tough. It's still a very tight market. And we have the same thing. We're making decisions based on people. And so you're looking at what a person's background is. You're looking at what their personal investment is in the idea, in the concept that they're trying to put together. And you're thinking about how, is this person someone that we want to put our money on? And so when we're thinking about those decisions, you're thinking about how you can give somebody an opportunity to do what they want to do. And that's, I think, how we try to do our job. So I guess last couple of points I think I would make. When we're looking for people, when I'm looking for people, or when I'm asked to give advice to people who are looking to get jobs in the public sector, who are looking to get jobs in economic development, I think I give a few pieces of advice, or I ask a few questions. We kind of try and figure out, are we aligned? Are you looking for a job, or are you looking for, are your values in alignment with what we're trying to do? I think that when I'm looking for someone, when I'm looking for skills, I'm always looking for writing. Do people write well? I think the greatest piece of it, there's two great pieces of advice I got, and I think I got them both from Ken Silliman, who was the chief of staff to the mayor until he retired a couple years ago. One, everything should be written so that it can be understood at a fourth grade level. People are busy, people have time constraints, and your job, your role is to be the expert in whatever it is that you're doing. If you're fortunate enough to work for a good boss, and I'm fortunate enough to work for a good boss, they have a level of trust in you that you can do what you're supposed to do, that you understand the technical details behind whatever it is that you're proposing to do. You don't need to explain that. So when he's saying write at a fourth grade level, it's make clear points that anybody can understand, that anybody can digest, and that anybody can then communicate. I think it's especially important in working in the public sector, but I think it applies to all life. Second, when the judge is going to rule in your favor, stop talking. I think there's a tendency sometimes where you see you're trying to convince somebody of something, and you've got a dozen points, and you lay out your first couple of points, and they're nodding, and it's getting ready to move along, and you bring up something else, and For me, part of my job is going before committees of council and explaining what it is that we're trying to do. And so you've got 7 or 9 elected officials who are sitting there who are following you along. You bring up, you think you're there, everybody's nodding, and then you bring up a third point, and it might remind someone of something that has nothing to do with anything you're talking about, but they have a point that they want to make. And so you can get bogged down, and then stuff can get held up. And so read your audience, think about what you're trying to do, and when you're about to get where you want to be, it's time to stop. So I'm not stopping there, but I might. Probably a third thing. So I work for the city. I work in the public sector. There's lots of stories out there that are about how the public sector works, bureaucracies, and so on and so forth. Almost every organization is a bureaucracy. I work with banks. I think banks are worse than we are from a process perspective. From the city's government, there's a process. It's out there, it's transparent. Things take time because they have to go through a process. You have to get buy-in from a variety of different stakeholders. I think you take something to a bank, it takes them 6 months to get through the process and approve it. Nobody can tell you what's going on. It's in underwriting. Oh, okay. It's on underwriting. Oh, it's still okay. So, yeah, you have to be successful in what you do. I think you have to know your organization. I don't think I can really highlight that enough. I think that's, from my perspective, the biggest key to whatever it is you're trying to know your organization, know your stakeholders, know your decision makers, know how you can work around blocks, know how you can, what your process looks like so you can adequately convey it back to whomever it is that you're trying to serve. Know your process. It's going to make you successful. Wrapping up, never lie to your boss. That's important. Invariably, they know more than you do. They may not know more than you do, but they know more than you do. People talk. This story, I think when you go back to, I have a 2-year-old, she's almost 3, and you get reminded of all the stories and children's movies. I've been watching Disney movies day and night for the last 8 weeks, 10 weeks. And so one of the common tropes of children's stories is that somebody goes out and they tell a lie and they get caught. And they keep digging themselves in and keep digging themselves in and keep digging themselves in. So perception is in a lot of ways reality. So once you start to, once you lie or you mislead, that all of a sudden that's the truth. And so then you got to live that truth, but it's a lie and there's no basis for it, and eventually it's going to catch up with you. So don't lie to your boss. It's not going to end well. It never ends well. I think it's important to follow the golden rule. I think you never know how. It's weird. Maybe it doesn't say it this way, but you always want people to owe you a favor. You never want to owe other people a favor. And so the way to do that is to follow the golden rule, to treat people how you want to be treated, to help pitch in when somebody else needs help. You have a lot of control, I think, in most cases. You have a lot of control over what you can do, as long as you get stuff done at the end of the day. At least that's how I try to manage the people who report to me. But you need people to pitch in, and I think if you treat people well and you're good to people, it will come back on you. That's been my experience. I've never seen something get accomplished by yelling or screaming or making a fit that couldn't maybe have been accomplished in a different way. And I've seen on a number of occasions where someone has taken an action that was a short-term win or short-term resolution that impeded or create an impediment to some future win or future opportunity that cut off maybe a way, cut off a relationship or cut off a path. So treat people the way that you'd like to be treated. Be kind, be fair. So wrapping up, I think it's always important to be aware of who you are and what you're trying to do, what your background is whenever you try to meet people, and to meet people where they are. And if you can do so, if you treat people well, if you try to think about what they're looking to do, think about how they're seeing things, and really try and care about how people think, then you can do well, and you'll have lived well by doing well. So on that note, I think I've made my point, so I'm going to shut up. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. You know, I mean, on the one hand, it's nice you have at least a little bit of certainty, right? I mean, every 4 years you're up for your job. If you're fortunate enough to have a good boss, a good elected official who has loyalty sort of as a two-way street, which I think I am, then you know that you go to the election and you come back. But I mean, it's always challenging. You're on ice. You're wondering what might happen if things don't work out our way. You wake up, you watch the elections returns, and then on Wednesday you've got to figure out what you're going to be doing in January. So it makes you it's a little bit nervous when you're going through the heat of the campaign, and you don't have any control over it, right? I mean, you get out, and you support or whatever, but it's not you. You're not on the ballot, right? So you try to do as best you can, and it worked out for us last 2 years ago, and then we go from there. But the other side of it is that if you live your values, if you do well in your work, then there's going to be opportunities for you out there. So it's something you always have to be aware of. Access to food is a huge problem in urban centers across the country. Getting fresh food, getting vegetables in, getting fruits is a major priority for us, and it's something that people nationwide are really working on the problem, and it all ties back to what I was talking about earlier with rooftops and incomes and so forth. It's a real challenge. And of course the impacts of not having the access, and so people eat more food that's not very good for them. So you have high obesity rates, you have high diabetes rates. The fact that it's a harrowing fact in a lot of ways, but the life expectancy for a resident in some neighborhoods on the east side of Cleveland is 20 years less than the life expectancy for someone who lives in Lyndhurst. Yeah, so food deserts is a major problem, is a major cause of that. But that's a statistic, and it's not a very good one. I think it's interesting because there's a few different concepts actually that people have been looking at, and it varies a lot from district to district. But I think probably the most interesting thing that we're seeing right now, we're seeing in a couple of neighborhoods, is the sort of this retail incubator concept. I alluded to it. We're doing it on a small scale in Glenville. There's a project. It's a much larger, more ambitious project that's getting looked at over in the Hispanic community off of West 25th Street in Cleveland. And so the idea behind these incubators is that you're layering in business development, technical assistance, so people can, experts are in there, so small business people can go in, get assistance. People need assistance for everything from how to keep their books to how to deal with a problem employee to what time should I be opening and what time should I be closing. So you layer that in. You have several small vendors. I think the one we're looking at is 6. This larger one is between 15 and 20. So you have a little bit more critical mass, so you can generate some of that walking around idea that is, I think, really important. And if you look at, it's the same concept as in a shopping mall or in a power center, a major retail center. People go shopping to have something to do, or they go shopping to get something and then wind up picking up 4 or 5 other things and so forth. And so in a lot of cases, a lot of times you may have a neighborhood where you have an isolated retail establishment who's really got to make it all on their own back, and they've got to do their own marketing and have to bring everything in. So this incubator concept combines sort of that startup opportunity growth with the critical mass of a series of storefronts or retail center that can attract a larger crowd and support one another. So I think that's the most impactful on an individual level. Yeah, so a couple of questions on, or a couple of points on industry. First, one of the views out there is of an industrial decline in Rust Belt communities, and it's not to dismiss it, but one of the statistics out is that industrial production in this region is as higher than it's ever been. But automation is causing it so that industrial employment is on a continued downward trend. So there's fewer companies, there's fewer employees, but the production is the same or stronger. Relatedly, our industrial workforce is skewed late career. So there are a number of, when we talk with industrial businesses, that's the thing we hear all the time: workforce. There's not enough workers out there that are good to bring people in. And so that's why one of the things that I think we're seeing an investment in education, the education space and the workforce space, is trying to help develop that, and there's been some success on that, but I think there's still work that can be done. But it's an opportunity. There's an opportunity out there for people to get into that field. On the attraction side, I think business attraction is tough. Attracting people in from out of market is really challenging. There's a few different factors. One of the interesting statistics is whenever there's a business move, really, whether it's in market or in market, so like someone moving from Solon to Cleveland or vice versa, or between markets, so somebody looking to locate from Cleveland to Atlanta or vice versa. The number one tell if you're looking at making a prediction where they're going to wind up is where the CEO lives. It's true. Corporate, ultimately the corporate decision maker is going to look at the process, and I would say in most cases, everybody's economic incentives kind of wind up about the same, costs, kind of wind up about the same. And, there's a winnowing process. The CEO doesn't look at all 50 potential options. They look at the top 3 or 4. And usually they wind up making the pick that's most convenient for them. So corporate attractions is a little bit tough. And that's why I think a lot of what we've been looking at doing and what we've seen a lot of growth has been in health and health IT. And that's been both, there's been some attractions where you've had mergers or you've had companies buy one another. But it's also a field that actually you don't read a ton about because it's not a particularly sexy or interesting, I don't find it very interesting, some people do, but field that you get covered. We talk about coal miners. It's a popular political thing, but you look at the employment numbers of coal miners versus IT professionals or housemaids or hotel maids, and there's a huge difference. And so health IT is probably the big thing we're seeing because there's a growing and a fairly strong sector in Cleveland that is growing and innovating, and so is thus attracting some talent, attracting some merger opportunities, some companies from outside the market. Take however much time you think you're going to be spending on your business and double it. That's the number one piece of advice I would give someone. It's a huge undertaking. Second is talk to someone. There's a lot of great people out there that there's a whole industry of people who want to help small business. Find someone who, talk to one of these organizations, get engaged with their programs, see if you can get matched with someone who's done it before, and try to get some advice to avoid a lot of the pitfalls a lot of people can get tripped up for things that are avoidable, but they don't know about it. That's the 2 pieces of advice. Third piece, I would say, we always say this all the time: rent, don't buy. If you buy something, then you're in a real estate business as well as your whatever business is you're trying to do, and your real estate business is going to take twice as much time as you think it would take you anyway. So I'd avoid that. But then I think on the other side of it is if you go through all that and you get to the end of the day, you've set yourself up to be successful. And so the thing I would say is, don't be afraid to fail. It's not a loss to fail. Businesses fail for a lot of reasons that are totally unforeseeable or out of control. If you do everything right, you've given yourself a chance to succeed, and you've shown that you have the ability to do it before you've even started. And so if your concept fails, take it back, learn from it, and get started again. If you look and you read about almost every entrepreneur who is world famous today, they failed. Sometimes they failed big time. Steve Jobs got kicked out of Apple. I mean, it's okay to fail. Just get back up.